All right. So we left off last class just taking a look at this graphic organizer related to the causes of World War II. And we sort of looked at it clockwise, Treaty of Versailles, and those measures passed against mainly Germany. The rise of fascism in Italy led by Mussolini, that's where we're gonna wrap up today. Japanese expansionism with not only it's sort of like the resurgence of the Kwantung Army led by Hideki Tojo, and really being strong-armed into, or strong-arming the Emperor Hirohito and the imperialists into this military conquest to take Manchuria, China, and other parts of the Pacific for natural resources, but also for imperial control. This obviously, I don't know if I mentioned this last class, one pretty significant impact is the fact that if you think all the way back to like the turn of the 20th century, this is an era of imperialism in China for England, Germany, America, France, the Dutch. Probably remember we talking about open door policy last year from the McKinley presidency into Theodore Roosevelt. John Hay sort of gets American interests in trade, Secretary of State under McKinley and Roosevelt. The Japanese want to push out Western powers that have imperial land holdings in places like the West Indies, Hong Kong, pretty much anywhere from China down into the South Pacific. Economic depression globally, that's not just in the United States, it's also it's going horribly, it's a horrific depression globally. Anti-communism in Western Europe and in the Western Hemisphere. Appeasement, we haven't really gotten to that yet, but we're going to talk about the appeasement of the Entente victors of World War I and allowing Hitler to come to power, Mussolini to come to power, Franco to come to power, and allowing these countries to ignore measures from the Versailles Treaty and other initiatives that were pushed by the League of Nations. Also, the fact that Japan leaves the League and there's nothing that can be done. Militarism, this is a retooling, like we talked about the Nazis kind of coming back into power undercover. Their factories were producing major armaments underground, and they were obviously ignoring the Treaty of Versailles rules against their rearmament. Rise of nationalism, and again, like I said, a lot of these people are, and I think Michelle brought it up last class, they're trying to restore a sense of dignity and national pride among a lot of these nations. And then, of course, the rise of Hitler. We'll begin to talk about the rise of Hitler today, and then we'll really get more into that in lesson 2. So let's talk a little bit about the rise of the Bolsheviks. The Bolshevik Revolution occurs during World War I. The term Bolshevik translates to the majority. They seized power in Russia. They are led by Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky. Both of them are Marxists. They believe in a Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, and they become really like the sort of key leaders of this movement. There is a group of about 7 Marxists that make up what is sort of known as a political bureau, and they're leading members of that, as well as Joseph Stalin, who was young political and really militaristic-minded force in this Bolshevik Revolution. So they try to spread, they want to see the spread of communism elsewhere. There were attempts in Hungary and Bavaria that ultimately failed. It caused a lot of the Central and Western powers, notably the United States, to fear a violent communist revolution would overwhelm their countries. And think about the civil unrest. So they're legit on the eastern, sort of the division between Eastern and Western Europe, sort of Eurasia. There's a lot of civil unrest. There's communistic parties, and it's not just going on in this area. There are communistic and anarchist uprisings in Germany. There's communistic anarchist uprisings in Spain. There are communist parties that will infiltrate governments in France, England, and then obviously there will be a communist party here in the United States. Do you guys, you ever remember talking about the first Red Scare led by Mitchell Palmer after World War I, where basically a number of communists or suspected communists, anarchists, were rounded up and they were deported to either Europe or Canada. They called that deportation the Soviet Ark. So again, this was not just a European issue. It was sort of a global issue. And Andrew, I'll get to your question in a second. So when we talk about the Entente, the original Triple Entente would have been England, France, and Russia at the start of World War I. But as Russia falls to communism, they kind of fall out of the Entente picture. And the victors of World War I, the United States, Italy, France, and England, they want to pass basically a cordon sanitaire, which is to prevent the border states, or what we know now, or what we would refer to ultimately as the Eastern Bloc, from falling to communism. So Lenin dies in 1924. Stalin takes control. Trotsky led a left sort of opposition against Stalin. He believed that Stalin was expanding the bureaucracy and was against that. So he'll go into exile in Mexico, and Trotsky in 1940 will be assassinated by a Spanish communist who was ordered. He was ordered by Stalin to lead the assassination on Trotsky. He was actually killed with a ice axe in Mexico.
Question: how did he find an ice axe in Mexico? Like, why would that be effective? Where would he even find an ice axe?
I mean, any place that you had, like, that period of time, like, it didn't matter where you lived, you had ice delivered to you. So there would have been ice axes, pickaxes, yeah. There were like ice houses and ice manufacturers. So like back in that period of time, like a guy would come and like deliver you like a block of ice. Just like a milkman would come and deliver your milk.
Like you just put a block of ice in there.
Yeah, this is like a weird, another weird family story, but I ended up with our family's ice box from my like great grandfather. It's in my basement. It now houses a bunch of toys, no longer blocks of ice. So, probably like a foot, one by one, 1 by 2. I mean, they were like the guy would pick the thing up with a pick, and then you like in your home. I guess you guys probably never grew up around that. Like there were always ice picks in my grandmother's house, and it was like, man, I can't believe they need these. This is pretty dangerous. And what they would do is they would take like the ice pick and take a hammer, and or you'd have like an ice hammer on one side, hammer on the back side. It was like a serrated type of blade, an axe blade, to chop up your ice. I did not grow up with an Iceman, but you know, the stories have been handed down. Yeah.
So someone on my maternal grandfather's side was an Iceman.
Oh, yeah.
So we actually have the pick thing that you would pick them up with.
That's cool.
And they're like really pointy tall.
Hang on to that. That would be good for your artifact project.
Cool, I'll do that.
So we've got Vladimir Lenin here on the left, Leon Trotsky on the right, and then the Soviet Union is formed, and are we familiar with what these symbols are for the Soviet flag? It's the hammer and the sickle, which is the symbol of what? Yeah, thank you. Good job, Jackson. It's a symbol for labor. So there's obviously anti-communism that spreads throughout, especially in Italy and Germany. So they're National Socialist fascists. They are going to push for militarism against the rise of the communist state. So this is where the Free Corps of the Germans, which evolves into the SA stormtroopers. This is the Nazis' militaristic wing to put down any communistic or anarchist uprisings. The Italians, we'll talk about their group. They were known as the Black Shirts. And what they're going to do is they are going to launch street warfare against communists. They're going to round up communists. So it's a little different than the U.S. Anti-communist movement of deportation. This is actually blood in the streets. So Hitler takes advantage of this and uses the anti-communist rhetoric to be sort of propel him not only within the Nazi Party political landscape, but also in the German political landscape. The Nazi Party becomes a dominant party in the Weimar Republic, and Hitler is promoted to chancellor. The burning of the Reichstag, which we'll talk about in lesson 2. This is where the parliamentary body of the Weimar Republic met. Well, it's still shrouded in mystery on who actually burnt the Reichstag down. It's likely Hitler ordered it to be burnt down, but the easy target to lay blame upon was the German communists. Stalin, again, I told you he was a leading member of the Politburo, the political bureau of the Soviet Union, original 7 sort of founding fathers of the Soviet Union. He takes full control after the death of Lenin. Stalin then launches the Great Purge from 1936 to 1938. Estimated 600,000 people were killed in Stalin's purge and rounded up by Soviet secret police, the NKVD. Torture tactics, poison gas, prison camps. This is where the chain of prison camps are going to be built in Siberia. Anyone that was an enemy of the party, an enemy of the state, or in opinion to Stalin, an enemy of labor or the Labor Party would be killed. So this becomes pretty horrific, one of the more horrific political holocausts in American history, or in world history in the 20th century. So here we have the man of steel, Stalin. Again, Hitler is anti-communist. Obviously, under communism, all means of production are controlled by the government, as property, the media, all aspects of society. So the 30s saw a rise of totalitarian regimes that chose fascism over communism. Hitler exploits the people's fear over the spread of communism, and most communists or suspected communists are rounded up, thrown in jail, or killed in Germany after Hitler takes control following the death of von Hindenburg in 1933. This is some anti-communist propaganda from Nazi Germany. So let's talk a little bit about the rise of Italian fascism. Obviously, Italy was on the winning side of World War I, but there was a great deal of corruption. The Great Depression hit Italy pretty hard early on. A lot of territory that Italy had been promised in northern Italy, or north of northern Italy, as a result of the carving up of lands and the mandate system. Are you all familiar with the mandate system? The mandate system was the winners of World War I basically carved up the colonies of the losers and sort of handed those out. So England gets a substantial amount of land in North Africa. Only a little bit of land in North Africa is gained by Italy, notably Liberia. Parts of Western and Eastern Africa are obtained by France, the Dutch, and England, and they don't wind up in Italian hands. So this leads to a bit of resentment. Hold on one second. This leads to a bit of resentment, and it allows for a World War I veteran and a journalist by the name of Benito Mussolini, Il Duce, to lead the fascist party that basically sought to create a new Roman Empire, get the countries back on a stable financial footing, to gain the land that they were promised and more after following World War I. And the fascist philosophy was strict social and economic control by the state, or by Mussolini and the black shirts. So Mussolini and Hitler rule with a strong centralized government. They control all aspects of politics, obviously belligerent nationalism with violence in the streets. And really the government controls not only all aspects of the political process, but all aspects of the economic process. So while the rest of the world is recovering from the Great Depression, what both Hitler and Mussolini are going to institute are these widespread state programs to get people employed. So Hitler begins construction on the Autobahn. Privately, he's building up an air force. He's building up 3 Panzer divisions. He's building up armaments at every turn. Mussolini's doing the same thing. Mussolini in the Mediterranean, the naval fleet that the Italians build surpasses the Mediterranean naval fleet and the naval presence of both England and France in the Mediterranean. Italy builds a pretty sophisticated air force when Mussolini comes into power. And Mussolini, this sort of famous quote, "I'll make the trains run on time." Did the trains run on time? Not always, but the quote there was, what Mussolini's trying to do is exactly what I mentioned before. He's trying to restore some national pride, but also some personal pride in an attempt to get Italian people employed. So Mussolini writes the doctrine of fascism, And essentially, it's a doctrine, it's a war doctrine, and I guess you could say it's comparable to Mein Kampf. There are some parallels that can be run between the two pseudo-memoir autobiographies, but there's one sort of stark difference here. Mussolini is writing about a return to the greatness of the Roman Empire, where Hitler in Mein Kampf is using this as a platform to try to shove blame for the impact of World War I and the desecration of the German state on Jews and undesirables. So here we have Mussolini. This is the symbol of the fasces, the iron rods wrapped around the axe handle. You guys probably have seen this in other places before. Chances are you have seen this in America in a number, or next to, or a part of a number of statues of George Washington. In fact, if you go into the Virginia State Capitol, smack dab in the middle of the Capitol is a statue of George Washington with, I don't know if his arm is rested upon it or his hand is rested upon, the symbol of fasces with 13 rods to signify the unification of the 13 states to become the United States. So what the symbol of fasces is a symbol of strength. And obviously the axe is a symbol of war, or at least militarism. All right, so Italy gets, after this military buildup, Italy will invade Ethiopia in 1935. This provoked little response from the League of Nations. Haile Selassie, the leader of Ethiopia, will appeal to the world and appeal to the League of Nations for help, but was ignored. This is another step closer to world war. It's another step closer to show that the League is going to dissolve and fall apart because they have no army, they have no real authority to be able to stop this invasion. This is a really tragic military campaign. The Italians sweep into Ethiopia armed with machine guns, tanks, planes, heavy artillery, and the Ethiopians, many of them, are fighting with spears. This is a really brutal start to what will become World War II. The Italian black shirts for Mussolini's army. They'll invade Albania in 1939, later invade Greece at the start of World War II. Again, Mussolini's building up a pretty significant air corps and navy. What Mussolini will not be prepared for is the military response that will occur from the Allied powers in North Africa. We're going to talk a little bit about that later. And that ultimately thins out the Italian forces, at least in the Mediterranean. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Germany comes to Mussolini's aid on several occasions, and what they're going to do is they're going to form what is known as the Steel Pact, and that's going to be the German or Nazi-Italian alliance, which is how they get the name the Axis powers. The two are spinning on the axis of Europe, or they form the axis of Europe, and the two countries intend to dominate. Again, a lot of this is also in reference to land in Central Europe, land in Africa, colonial land holdings that had been controlled by the other members of the Entente, notably England and France. And then promises had been made to provide land in Albania and Asia Minor, but were ignored following World War I. So here we have Italian black shirt hat with cap with the fascist symbol. Here we have Mussolini. This is the invasion, the Italian invasion of Ethiopia. Bottom left is are the black shirts, and then bottom right is Haile Selassie, the leader of Ethiopia. So again, Mussolini glorifies the state, wants to return to the glory of return to the glory of the Roman Empire, comes to power in 1922, and institutes this political ideology of fascism. He was a former soldier, journalist. All aspects of the Italian fascist regime will be controlled by him and his militaristic wing, the black shirts. There was little opposition, protest to him coming to power, because any of those that protested were met by military force. He controlled propaganda, censorship, and he will form the Pact of Steel with Nazi Germany on May 22nd, 1939. All right, any questions? So that wraps up the prelude to war. What we're going to look at next is sort of the rise of the Axis, mainly Nazi Germany, in lesson 2.